You know, it's Halloween. I guess everyone's entitled to one good scare, huh?
I was recently able to check out the documentary, Scream Queen, My Nightmare on Elm Street, the story of Mark Patton, his struggle, stuff that I chronicled in much shorter form on this very channel, which you can check out on this very channel. But it was important to me to check this out because not only was it a very well-made documentary, more importantly, it filled in some of the gaps and gave more context to why he left Hollywood. Because as horror fans, we're looking at things through the lens of horror film. And we see that he was a gay lead who was closeted, who was cast in a movie with a lot of gay subtext in an era where there was a lot going on to try to out gay actors, and that's what ended up happening to him. But there was pieces to the puzzle missing in a story that needed to be told. So I'm not going to give too much away because I want you to go check out the documentary. I really enjoyed it. But it had to do with the climate around gay people and HIV and the unknown plague that was AIDS at the time. And here he was, a guy who had it, trying not to be outed, and now when you go and you audition for movie roles, he just couldn't do it because if he went, he had to take a blood test. He would have been outed, not just as gay, but as HIV positive. And the tabloids would have eaten it up as they were doing at the time. Not much has changed, obviously, as far as the media is concerned today. So that was a huge piece of the puzzle as to why he left Hollywood that no one was really talking about. Everyone made it about the movie. It was the movie because he was gay, because he was outed. And it had a lot more to do with some personal things he was going through at the time and being HIV positive. In a moment of clarity, he says he could not have handled fame, Hollywood, the whole situation as it stood at that moment. So it was a blessing in disguise that he ended up leaving Hollywood. And now that he's older and has wisdom and he's healthy and the climate has changed a little bit, now he feels like he can handle fame and stardom and recognition. So, which is nice to see him coming back on the convention circuit and doing more public things as this film has seen more positive recognition. And I think for many reasons, this documentary makes A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2 feel like a much more historic film, especially when David Chaskin, the writer of the film, pretty much unloads and says that whole climate is exactly why he wrote the subtext of the film. That there were people dealing not just with the guilt and not just with the secret, maybe AIDS being this dirty, nasty thing that was killing people from the inside out. I know the writing and the way it was done and the way he kind of shielded blame at the time was probably in bad taste or a poor decision at best. Looking back on it 25, 30, 35 years later, he was right on the nose because he was able to tap into the cultural zeitgeist and he was able to grab a hold of something that was so raw and so in your, just man, how many filmmakers can make a film that taps into the psyche of the zeitgeist or the culture so much that it causes all of these issues and all of this scrutiny and is still getting this attention 25 and 35 years later. So to me, this cemented for me A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2's legacy. It forced us to look at something or confront an issue, whether it's on a conscious or subconscious level. And to me, the best horror movies all do that. This film, it needed 20 or 30 years and time to pass before we could look at it and really appreciate it for what it was. The world wasn't ready for it. So I think it's more than your standard slasher sequel. I think if you look at Friday the 13th or even A Nightmare on Elm Street, like people cite Dream Warriors as the greatest sequel of the franchise, and that's a fair argument. It's fun. They do some cool stuff. The effects are great. But really, it's just another chapter of the same story. And it's rare that sequels tread new ground and do new things with characters or with the subject matter. And although Nightmare 2 strays pretty far from the original mythos of Part 1 and what Part 3 got back to, it accomplished that. It said something completely different, told a completely different story than a lot of other horror movies of the day. Whether you deal with mental illness or PTSD or depression or anxiety, like when you deal with something that's so personal and something that you feel like you can't relate to other people about, or they can't relate to you. There's an isolation and a loneliness that goes into it. And that's why, as a kid, I identified with Jesse the character, and later on with Mark Patton the individual, even though I wasn't gay, because I felt like I was Jesse. I was awkward. I was more sensitive than most. I felt different. I felt odd. I didn't fit in. It's a movie that a lot of people can identify with, whether you're gay or not. I think the story of Mark Patton is fascinating and, again, brings in some more of the context as to why it was a big deal with what he was going through. And most importantly, I'm glad that he had some closure, because I've interacted very seldom with him, but I've interacted with him on social media a few times. Seems like a great guy. But anyway, great documentary, great story. Nice to have some resolution, and gave it more historical context. And again, I know the way David Chaskin went about handling things may have been a poor choice, but he really did tap into what was going on. And I think that, with some of the air being cleared, needs to be recognized. We weren't ready for it yet, and it wasn't handled very well. So kudos to everybody. Check out Scream Queen, My Nightmare on Elm Street. You can check it out on Amazon Prime and on Shudder. And if you want more context and short form to this story, want to watch the original video, it's under the horror history playlist on this channel. So I'm B. Show Brian. I'm out of time. This is Halloween 365.